This episode of 50 Shades of Planning is brought to you in partnership with Kratos Group. We are a leading communications consultancy, helping some of the UK's best-known brands deliver local and national campaigns, manage political and reputational risks, and influence national policy on some of the most important issues facing the UK. Find out more at kratos.co.uk.
Hello viewers, Sam Stafford here, reporting from home in Ripponden, in what today is wet and miserable West Yorkshire. In anticipation of the revised NPPF, my response to which I am pleased to report was submitted ahead of the consultation deadline earlier this week, I invited some of the Shades alumni to discuss some of the policy areas of most interest to them and how the new government could and should approach them. 8 conversations were recorded, elements of which you might have heard formed part of episode 128 of the podcast, but I am publishing them all in full here on the YouTube channel. This is the 8th of the 8, the last of the series, which is a conversation between Nicola Gooch, Petricca-Riding and David Diggle about planning for infrastructure and the environment. Nicola and Claire are partners at Irwin Mitchell, and David is a senior director at Turley. You will also hear from David's dog. Their conversation takes in, amongst other things, onshore wind, NSIPs and NPSs, data centres and grid capacity, nature recovery, nutrient neutrality and water, and some speculation at that time about what the NPPF would bring. Enjoy.
We had Rachel Reeves only, I can't remember, it was 1 or 2 working days into this new administration setting out Labour's plan for growth, for which planning and infrastructure plays a vital part. Set out quite a significant agenda for both environment and infrastructure, and actually how the two will be combined. So where do we want to start? Do we want to start with NSIPs? Do we want to start with solar and renewables? Do we want to start with nutrients?
Well, we can start at the top, I think. I think the first thing is that, I think it's the first time, I think everyone in the sector is getting quite excited, actually, for a long time, perhaps 14 years, as it were. And it's interesting in the context that straight out the gate, in Rachel Reeves' speech, but also then flows through into the King's speech, is that planning reform is very much at the centrepiece of what Labour want to do. And I think it's Labour, in my view, seems to suggest that, the cupboard is bare almost in terms of money to dish around, so to speak. So it's applying the levers that it's available to them, particularly on the supply side. And they see very much of planning reform as key to get Britain building again. It's first and foremost. And if we get Britain building again, that will foster economic growth. It will create the income, therefore, for the administration perhaps to do more investments where it needs to do in due course. So it's a key supply side measure. The interesting challenge is for that is how quickly it can actually happen. 3 million houses over the parliamentary period. That's, and also when you foster in local, time bedding in for local plan reforms and changes to NSIP regime and so on and so forth. All that takes time, but it's certainly a pleasant surprise that they seem to be very committed to planning reform. And we've had years of potential tinkering. And so it's all looking quite exciting. I think we're all, as a professional, are quite exciting. The detail is not potentially there at the moment, which is a bit of a challenge. But very much, I think the industry is and the sector is very excited. And the first thing is you see when you wake up and you read the articles in the Times and other papers, planning is everywhere. So as a practitioner, it's quite refreshing rather than perhaps the perception that the profession has had over many years.
But
I
what's
think it's
really,
certainly coming in, isn't it? In
yeah,
terms of just being able to provide that investment piece into the mix. So obviously, just to have some investor confidence to be able to come to be able to bring that back in, where they know that, right, okay, straight from the off, this is what we're going to hopefully be able to achieve. This is what we're going to be setting out in the next few months, and over the course of the Parliament, or certainly in the next few years. This is what we're going to hopefully achieve. This is what it's going to mean for the country. This is what it's going to mean for you on an individual basis when we start looking at, well, we're going to be bringing you better homes, better quality green space, but also lower energy bills if we get the energy infrastructure right. But actually, from an investment point of view, we're going to give you the confidence that actually we're going to set these things in motion right now, right from the get-go, to enable you to have some confidence that you can invest in the UK, and it's a good place to do business. So I think that setting that out early doors has been quite fortuitous from their point of view.
and I know you say it'll take some time, but some things they're delivering pretty darn quick. We got the onshore wind policy statement, I think, before the Chancellor left the podium, which, Claire, I know wind energy is a big thing for, well, your past experience and your future practice, but that must have been wonderful seeing that come out so quickly.
It's it's certainly something that we've been calling for a long time, but time will tell as to whether there is actually the investment that's there in that market. I think that there's some optimism, but I think that there's some cautiousness in relation to whether there is an onshore wind market in England. Obviously, what we can see in Scotland, that it's obviously very, very successful there. I think that, so we've got a number of things. We've got the Great British Energy Bill, but we've also got how that interrelates to the Crown Estate Bill, and how it's going to really, really use the Crown Estate, but from an offshore market. So I think there's lots of things still to see the detail of, but equally, yeah, quite exciting from an onshore wind perspective. But cautious optimism, I would say, in that regard.
Sometimes the action though speaks 1,000 words, isn't it? Of this is we're not sitting around here. We're looking to move pretty quickly. One thing that struck me about the change in the policy, which not only the swiftness that happened, but also the tone of the language in it. And I think my view is it was very much NSIP-esque policy in the national framework, which is, as you both know, the text that the tone of policy to NSIPs and national policy statements are slightly different from national policy framework, and it was very much more NPS-like. Need is sorted out. You don't have to argue about need. You have to kind of look to minimise your impacts. But some of that language was very, very interesting and very welcome straight from the get-go.
Definitely. And I think just where we are with the NSIP regime as well, in terms of the consultation that came out earlier this year, I think it ties in nicely with trying to have some modernisation and amendments to that regime to make it swifter. And there's certainly, in terms of the documentation that sat behind the King's Speech, there was a lot that spoke about trying to elevate the time period for dealing with applications when they go through the NSIP regime, so and how much they are delayed at the moment. So certainly in that space of bringing that forward, it's interesting the timing as well. So it's something that they can easily do in the space that's currently being carved out for the reform of the NSIP regime as well. So I think for them, the planets have just aligned perfectly to just allow that to take some shape as well.
I mean, they certainly haven't been shy about the statement of intent or the direction of travel when it comes to renewable energy projects, because we had I want to say 3, but it might only be 2. I keep getting confused between the data centers and the solar farms. Was it 3?
Yeah.
3 solar
No,
farm
there's 3.
decisions. Yeah, coming out in, what was that, 1 or 2 days? And
Just on
then
one
we have,
day.
just
But I
on the
think
one day,
that
yeah.
they couldn't, sorry, I think they couldn't do anything else though, because obviously Ed Miliband had been so clear in his remit, but also getting Chris Stark to come in. Obviously, Chris Stark was the chair of the Climate Change Committee, but having him on board to lead Mission 2030, I don't think that they could have done anything else. And it's an easy win, isn't it, to say, actually, we're going to grant these permissions, because then equally, then that also just taps in really, really quickly to have some clean energy that's going to be delivered. So may upset some people, but actually, if you're going out with a statement of intent to bring forward some clean renewable energy schemes, having 3 big ones that's sitting on your desk waiting for approval, is quite fundamental, isn't it? It's quite.
And
That
covering
must
those.
be quite nice to first day of work.
Can you hear my dog, by the way?
No,
Okay.
not the slightest.
Good. That's great. So we talk about NSIPs then, and what potentially the future holds. Obviously, the previous government had almost a bit of a root and branch review, almost, over the last couple of years, about looking to quicken the process up. Obviously, I think the government did publish a kind of route map for reform, which included various things about shortening the examinations, possibly, fast track, certain applications, 5-star service and planning inspectorate and so on. Interested to hear what you both think about what potentially this government would do in terms of improving the NSIP regime in order to deliver the outcomes that it wants to do.
Well, I think I actually quite liked the roadmap that was already set out. I quite liked the fact that you did have a fast track service. I also quite like the way that the statutory consultees could charge for the service, because then actually what that enables that to do is to be able to provide investment into those statutory organisations, to be able to actually invest in people, to be able to deal with the process. So if you know that you're going to have 50,000, 100,000 pounds worth of fees coming in, and that can be ring-fenced for specific people to come and actually just deal with those applications. I think if you asked any developer or applicant if they would be prepared to pay for additional fees, when you know that then that's going to fast track that part of the application process, I think, well, from my point of view, I think that's a surefire winner. And I think if we transfer that into the town and country planning process, I think if you could ring fence funds for statutory consultees, because often it's the delay that's caused by the consultation process that causes some friction. But if you knew that those statutory consultees were going to have some dedicated people that were going to look at the applications, because actually the funds that were derived from applications were ring fenced, I think that was a good thing. So I think that there are. So I think that the roadmap has actually set out a framework that the new government can work towards, and I think having a look at what the NPSs do, and whether they're actually, I know we did have a change in terms of the renewable energy ones, and they have been having a look at in recent years, and certainly at the beginning part of this year. But again, going back and making sure that they're fit for purpose for an ongoing regime, I think is vital. And I think that there's obviously some talk in terms of the announcements that have been made to ensure that the NPPSs are reviewed, and whether we actually need some new NPPSs as well, to bring forward new infrastructure schemes. So I think it's all sounding positive from my point of view. I think utilising the basis of what the NPPF might say in terms of deliverability, and utilising that platform to be able to change the NPPS, I think is only it's only going to be a good thing, isn't it? It's a great idea in terms of just having that momentum and utilising the momentum that's already been created from the sector responding to the roadmap in any event.
I mean, I'm going to agree with Claire for many reasons, including the fact that she's right.
Well, absolutely. No, I think, I completely agree. There was a lot of some decent stuff, but there's lots of good stuff in that roadmap, which has to, it's more about kind of, and some of these things, thinking's already been done for the new administration in some way, and now it's more about just enacting and implementing it. The national policy statements is a quite interesting one, and I do muse whether, certainly with the calling on data centers as an example, whether.
I think data
Sorry.
centers are likely to get an NPS with some serious attention. There's been talk about grid capacity, and I would not be surprised if grid capacity and transmission infrastructure got some quite serious attention in the not too distant future, particularly because if they're going to go down the renewable routes that they're going, we need it. We desperately need it, particularly for the large scale solar. But also just generally.
Yeah, completely, agree, really. I think maybe some of the the emergence of data centers have brought that to the fore in terms of urgent energy needs, but then also the reality that certain developers have agreements which are not being put in place and so on and so forth. So in order to, get Britain building again, you not only have to resolve the consenting process, but you also need to resolve the consenting and delivery process and other elements of capital projects, including energy grid connection, and so on and so forth.
Water. Do we want to get onto water now? I mean, there is a lot to talk about with water. Ties in with the
Just before we go on to water, though. Sorry, just 1 second before we go on to the water part, though. But the grid was actually captured into the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. Because there it says that they're going to streamline the delivery process for critical infrastructure, including accelerating upgrades to the national grid and boosting renewable energy. So again, seeing that tying into the Great British Energy Bill. That being the sort of cornerstone of benefiting local communities, unlocking the delivery of the 2030 clean power mission and the net zero obligations, but also securing domestic energy. So I think, as you say, David, I think that there's obviously that clear direction of travel. So it's not just about the energy projects themselves, but it's also about actually bringing into line that that wider infrastructure piece. But also then they've looked at the compulsory purchase compensation provisions as well. So that ties in with that whole NSIP regime as well, and how compensation can be paid. So there is a much broader discussion, and it does look like they are trying to have a much more coordinated and balanced approach to it, to say, right, okay, well, what is it that we need to achieve or to be able to deliver these projects? So it's not just necessarily about just sticking the wind turbines there, it's actually about having a look at the grid, and it's having a look at what compensation provisions that we can make to make sure that the schemes work. But then obviously then tying in with the Crown Estate Bill, I think that's actually going to be quite radical in terms of making sure that the Crown Estate is being able to invest, that then forward funds investments for renewable energy, and making sure that the Crown Estate actually works and is making money instead of sort of not the way that it's currently working. So I think
There's
that
something
those
in the pension.
issues are really
Sorry,
good. And then obviously,
there's something in the
I was just going to
pensions
say, and
bill
then that
as
goes back to your
well.
data center.
Yeah. Okay.
I was about to say, then that turns into your data center point, where they are obviously then bringing forward and looking at how the grid is working, because that's what the data centers need.
There's also something in the pensions bill about making sure that pension investments can be refocused to boost growth as well, which I suspect may also come back to renewables and infrastructure projects. But and this goes beyond the scope of this talk, but the one thing that I am the most excited and relieved and optimistic and hopeful about this particular government that's just come in is that they do seem to be taking a properly holistic, joined up approach to the challenges that we are facing in planning and environment. And these things all do follow through, as Claire was just saying about the energy bill and the grid connections and the data centers and the solar. They're actually taking a proper in the round look at how we need to deliver. I mean, why it has taken this long to get a joint letter on nature recovery from Deluc and DEFRA, I find astonishing. But the fact that we now have one has made me honestly so nerdily happy. I don't think I have ever been so delighted about anything in my life as actually seeing some proper cohesive cross-departmental cooperation going on in an area which desperately needs it.
Well, it's almost the grown-ups have entered the room almost to a degree. It feels like it sometimes, and there's clearly a lot of thinking that's gone on in terms of what we need to make things change, what we need to, for that change, what needs to happen, and actually deliver on the ground. And I think it finds also it's just going to be UK PLC are going to be a lot more attractive for investment as well. Not only there was a couple of months ago, wasn't there? Really, a couple of weeks ago, really, when the election in France and obviously what was going on in America, that you could actually all of a sudden see we had a government of stability, which, and that seems to be clearly a golden thread, as it were, that's going to be running through government activity. We're stable, but we're grown up. We're going to deliver this properly, and all that is attractive for outside investment into UK PLC. So I think it's a really good start, isn't it? Really, and if I was looking for outside looking into the UK, I can see that this potentially could be a country, Great Britain as well, so that we can actually invest in, particularly given the last 10 years of the implications of Brexit and so on and so forth. So probably I'm taking a bit strategic level there, but I think it's a useful point to note. So going back to your point really about a joint letter from Angela Rayner and Steve Reed, which is great. I'm not sure why it come out on a Saturday. Did it come out on Saturday? It's one thing the
It
government
did, yeah.
need to work a bit more on, perhaps. But at the very essence, that's a very, very good start. And obviously, nature recovery is trailed into the King's Speech, and the letter there is reaffirming economic growth commitments to house building and housing delivery, but also nature, to be just as equally as a top priority of getting Britain building again, really. So it was really useful. Sorry, go on.
And also the recognition that is actually already an emerging marketplace, and that they're going to go and talk to all of the stakeholders, and will only legislate if they can't find another way through. I think was really, really interesting, because particularly with nutrients, I mean, Claire, I'll leave the water regulation stuff to you, but that also plays into this. But the issue with nutrients is that it is a very wide-ranging, multifaceted problem that actually takes into account farming practice, wastewater regulation and water companies, as well as development in water efficiency and nature recovery. So it's quite a amorphous, multifaceted issue, which one of the reasons why the HBF is so up in arms about it is that because house building is the one part of it which is currently easily controllable, it does seem to be bearing the brunt of a lot of the mitigation measures, whereas farming permits and water treatment companies historically have been less closely scrutinised in that respect. But I get the feeling that a more holistic and joined up approach might start to be taken from that as well. And there was certainly a lot about water regulation in the notes behind the King's speech, although I have to admit I didn't get into them in detail.
Well, again, I think it helps to have, as you say, the grown-ups in the room, but I think it also helps to have all those people who were in the shadow cabinet doing the jobs. I mean, I know that Steve Reed came into the DEFRA role September last year, but equally he had enough time to catch up with his brief. But also his junior minister had been in post as that shadow minister for quite a while as well. So you've got the three big hitters of Angela Rayner, Ed Miliband and Steve Reed have been working on their briefs for a long time, and also then having been in that position, be able to take it forward and have those relationships already with each other to be able to work quite quickly on deliverability. And obviously then, you know, we've got Matthew Pennycook and some of the other junior ministers in each of those departments still being able to play their role that they had in shadow cabinet coming forward. So it does feel very set up to be very, very strategic, and which is great to see. And yeah, the letter was really welcome news because, well, we've not really had anything that's been so joined up, but also if you want to get Britain building again. So yes, great to have all that economic development and investment in, but also to recognise that nature recovery needs to play a fundamental role in that. So whether that is looking at the targets in the Environment Act or just bringing forward much more wider nature recovery programmes, but it gives that opportunity for that market to sort of capitalise on that and actually have some profit that's derived out of nature recovery. And I think that we're going to start to see a new wave of the, don't even know whether this is a word, but the privatisation of nature recovery. And I think that we're going to start to see much more of that coming out from businesses and about how they can utilise the assets that are available to them now that we've got a much more clearer focus on how that market's going to, you know, be delivered. And also the direction of travel for that as well. So it's, yeah, it was really, even though it came out on a Saturday, as you say, David, it was random day, but really great message. But at least we've all been able to read it this morning. So, but do we want to talk about the water side, or does anybody else want to pick up on anything that we've already spoken about?
I think we kind of do have to talk about water, don't we?
We do, but do you want to talk about it now, or do you have anything else that you want to cover?
We can talk about it now. I've got a huge amount, obviously being neutrality hasn't really affected much of us, you know, in the north, but it'll be quite interesting to hear a bit more about it. But you know, do we also see anything about obviously not only the issues of water previously in terms of, you know, the news in the papers about pollution and so on and so forth, but our actual water infrastructure is actually crumbling, isn't it? From my understanding, and there's a huge investment required in order to bring it back up to speed. You know, billions of pounds, as I understand it, and whether we see, you know, that is almost the next kind of ticking time bomb, as it were, in order to sort out in terms of our infrastructure. Perhaps? Question mark.
I think
Definitely.
that time
So
bomb might not be ticking so much as slowly imploding as we speak.
Really?
Well, certainly leaking anyway, to use the water analogy. um, uh, so in the document behind the King's Speech, it said the total dividends paid to shareholders by water companies in England between April 2010 and April 2023 amounts to just under £21.2 billion. So that's actually investment that could have come into the water infrastructure. And obviously then we've had in recent times, in the last few months, with various water companies potentially going into special measures, asking for increase in water bills to cover crumbling infrastructure. But actually, when you see that sort of stark figure there, that's actually what's been paid out instead of what's been actually being reinvested. And now I know that there is a whole argument to say, well, these are companies, so there is a requirement for a return on investment, but I think if you haven't actually dealt with the infrastructure and the capital costs that are required to bring that infrastructure up to scratch and forward plan, then there is an argument to say, well, actually, you shouldn't have paid out so much money because you needed to have brought that into your costings going forward. So I think the discussion in terms of the Environment Act, when it was going through both the Commons and the Lords, and about the storm sewage overflows, it's been critical to raising the profile of what our water environment might look like, and what it does actually look like to a lot of people. So again, the King's Speech detail said that there were 464,056 storm overflow spills recorded last year, a record number and an increase of 54% compared with the spills in 2022. Now, some of that might have been down to the weather pattern, but equally, it's down to the sort of lack of investment in infrastructure. So you've got two issues that are sort of butting up against each other. One, we've got a deteriorating water environment, which seems to have deteriorated since Brexit as well. And then you've obviously got then the lack of capital investment into sort of the critical infrastructure that's required to make sure that we've got water and storage infrastructure that's actually fit for purpose and fit for modern life. Because we haven't built a reservoir since privatisation either. So I think where we've got critical infrastructure that's required in terms of making sure that we've got enough water going forward. So there's some areas that don't have enough water. Down south, I know, David, we're up north, so we're plenty, it won't stop raining. But equally, there are areas of the country that don't have enough water, and actually what we need to do to ensure that preservation of that critical resource as well. So,
and those
Nicola,
parts of the country
something.
which aren't officially water stretched right now, which is where I am, I'm in Kent in the southeast, we aren't officially water stressed, I don't think, or at least we're on the border. But Claire has heard me moaning over the last 18 months or so about the number of times that we have run out of water because of issues with reservoirs and pumping stations and things going wrong and bottled water not being delivered, all of which largely comes down to lack of investment. And if we could just get our water infrastructure functioning, we would go a long way to resolving pollution, nutrients, water scarcity. I mean, yes, we do need to be more water efficient in our development, and there are changes to the building codes coming up, or building regs coming up, which will encourage that. But it would certainly help if the pipes didn't leak anywhere near as much as they currently do.
Well, yes, most definitely.
So do we think that the new government is doing enough with what's happened or what we know in the King's Speech, and do we feel a bit more positive about it, or?
Well, again, they've got a foundation to build on, because particularly when it comes to nutrients, we did have a baseline now in LURA, which has been enacted, which will force improvement in nutrient neutrality affected or particularly nutrient sensitive areas. So that is a start. but it is only a start, and there is a lot further that could be done. And I think the fact that we do actually now have a Water Regulation Act in the King's Speech can only be seen as an encouraging thing.
But it's actually it's contained in the Water Special Measures Bill. So one thing, it's repeated time and time again: local planning authorities, the NSIP regime, the Environment Agency, anything that is a governmental organisation that's got a regulatory function. So part of the problem is that the Environment Agency hasn't really been funded enough to be able to hold water authorities to account. So the prosecution rate for breaches has decreased over the years. The level of fines that have been imposed has also gone up for those few instances where we've had prosecutions. So the fines are meaningless, though. It's just, it gets paid to the Treasury, but actually it just prevents the water company from further investing, because it's taking fines away from it's taking money away from what could be spent on infrastructure. But it's always been seen as a bit of a toothless tiger if the Environment Agency or the regulator is not going to regulate the water authorities. So actually what we've got is to give new regulatory powers to the water regulator. So giving new regulatory powers to Ofwat, giving new funding for I think for the Environment Agency to take action, but also strengthen the regulation to ensure that water bosses face personal criminal liability for law breaking, which is going to be crucial. Now, there is already that in the legislation. If either a director or senior manager of any organisation has got some connivance, neglect, or the turning a blind eye to anything. But if they're going to strengthen that provision to ensure that the water bosses do face some kind of criminal sanction, that might then also bring measures home. But they're also going to boost accountability for water executives through the new code of conduct. They're going to require water companies to install real-time monitors at every sewage outlet with data independently scrutinised by the water regulators. That, I think, is going to be quite onerous to put in place. If you think about all the sewage outlets in the country, that will be quite onerous. But equally, they do have that sort of telemetry and that telemetric data that can be derived from the outflows. So that might sort of also bring things into focus. But we've also got money being ring fenced for investment. There's an agreement by all the water companies to change the articles of association to make sure that the ring fencing is being put into place. But we've also then got a provision for panels of customers and also the water authorities and the regulators to sit together. So actually looking at it from a consumer's point of view, that we're paying for infrastructure that's not getting built, and we're also paying for a service that's actually not fit for purpose. So ourselves as individuals holding the water companies to account. So actually, if this bill comes to fruition in the way that they want it to do, it could be quite game changing in the way that it regulates the sector to be able to hopefully unlock. So going back to your point, Nicola, about unlocking development, because actually the infrastructure will be there to be able to bring forward the protections that are required for the SPAs, etc., and the SACs. So that is there to try and hopefully build some kind of satisfactory infrastructure going forward, which will then deal with it at root cause, as opposed to saying, well, you can't have anything else that's going to produce any other effect onto the environmental side. So dealing with the load there at source rather than dealing with the load.
Yeah,
I realised that crossing my fingers on a podcast is not necessarily the most accurate way to respond to the points that Claire was saying.
Well, it was really interesting, obviously when you think about what they're intending to do with the railways, and then you have Great British Energy, I think it's called, two nationalised pieces there. It wouldn't surprise me that that there's probably been some internal discussions about whether water would also be part of that nationalistic piece, as it were, and maybe they just potentially thought that that's too much to chew, too much to bite at this moment in time, and hence there's an alternative arrangement to make some significant improvements.
Also, it would be
Completely
very
agree.
expensive.
Well,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
I just think that the way that the system is set up and the way that the water companies have now been set up, I think it would just be so costly to renationalise those at this point. If we get, don't forget they're talking about a decade of renewal, so it wouldn't surprise me that in the latter part of this period of this government, or the going into, if they are successful in doing what they set out to do and they get a second term, whether then that would be something that they would look at. But equally, they might not need to. So if they've got the system working now, personally, on a personal level, I think that water should be nationalised. It should never have been privatised in the first place, because it's not like me sitting here in the northwest only being able to be serviced by United Utilities. And let's be honest, water is a fundamental right. We actually need it to be able to survive as a human race. I can't just say, well, actually today I'm going to get some water from Southern. I don't want to get it from United Utilities. So it's not the same as everything else. So I don't think it should have been privatised in the first place. But equally, if they can get the system working, because we just need some more investment, we need investment into the infrastructure, and the infrastructure needs to work for a modern economy and a modern population.
But also,
Bearing in mind the climate change that's going to come
Yeah.
about, and it's going to change the weather patterns. So I think all of those things, if they can get the system working, they might think actually we don't need to renationalise it, because we've got it sorted in this way.
But in any event, if you were going to renationalise it, wouldn't you rather renationalise a functioning system rather than one that's going to immediately require millions and millions and millions of pounds of investment because it's fundamentally broken?
That is also true.
Yeah, quite. Yeah.
Right, I think Sam wants us very quickly to talk about what we expect to see in the new NPPF when it comes to infrastructure and environment. To be fair, I think more than there is at the moment would probably be a good start, because I think the running joke is it's a national planning policy for housing more than anything else.
Yes. Quite. Yes. Well, equally as well, we similar can be said when we talk about employment. For example, we advocated for a while now, along with the BPF and others, that logistics is a critical piece of infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And there's been some significant lobbying over the years to expand that employment chapter a little bit more, to give it a bit more substance and a bit more weight. It's moved a little bit, I think, but obviously there's a lot more opportunity to increase that that part of the sector, particularly as well if you're looking to deliver so much housing. And obviously economic growth, well, they come hand in hand, and providing the right employment space at the right time in the right places is very much the same as housing, and they've got to come together as well. So those have to be aligned. But it seems to me that clearly with net zero agenda and delivery of infrastructure, is a clear plan of this new administration. So it needs to be, if we only have a couple of token words and suggestions in there, it'll be a bit of a disappointment. But I don't think we're gonna end it right.
And I think that we're going to see a lot more about how that can be delivered, how we can reinvigorate the rural economy. Having listened to the junior minister's speech at the NFU, recently there was a lot to talk about in terms of reinvigorating the rural economy to make that fit for purpose as well. So I expect to see some more information about that in the NPPF, and the letter is going to go down as the famous the Saturday letter, isn't it? They go for. So the letter had 2 words in it, which stood out for me, and it wasn't nature recovery, it was environmental outcomes, and the letter made a sort of a very oblique reference to environmental outcomes. So I'm expecting the NPPF to be very much focused around that language. I don't think that we've seen the last of environmental outcome reports, to be honest with you. Just seeing that the way that letter was drafted, seeing those 2 words in that letter, I think that we're going to start to see a around that narrative in the NPPF, and I think we're going to start to see a lot more about climate change mitigation, and how we can deliver net zero through the NPPF as well. That's my bit for the environment.
I'm waiting to see whether the damaging Conservative changes to the NPPF that Labour have committed to reverse includes that slightly bizarre paragraph about solar and food production land. I wouldn't be surprised if it did. I would not be surprised if it did, because that was a slightly odd late insertion by the Conservatives. So I think there might be some rethinking around that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting when we mentioned environmental outcomes, because I was trying to look for that. Obviously, it's part of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, and there was a consultation done last year, the previous governments, and it was the first time I've actually seen environmental outcomes under this new administration. It'd be interesting to see whether they pick that up and run with it, as you potentially suggest, Claire. Because originally, before, I was thinking that they may give there may be an opportunity now to probably just pause and say, is it the right approach for us? A new regime, untested, or is it a better way of potentially going down the route of EIA reform rather than a completely new avenue? Anyway, we'll wait and see, no doubt.
I think there's definitely some EIA reform, because it's even mentioned in the documentation about the many thousands of pages of EIA documentation. And there is a doubling up on EIA and SEA. So it's about how you can actually just reform the system to make it work, and how it is aligned to ensuring that if there is any effect arising out of that particular development, that's then mitigated. So it is looking at an environmental outcome and working backwards, isn't it? So, but equally, I was quite surprised to see those 2 words in that in the letter. So it just makes me feel that they are looking at that element of deliverability as well.
I've heard rumours just on the grapevine that this might be a little bit of a live debate as to which way the government goes, exactly how much of LURA they want to pick up and use. And it's not just environmental outcomes reports. I mean, I've heard similar types of things around national development management policies. Are they useful? Are they too difficult? Do they want to take them forward? Do they not? There's quite a lot. Yeah, exactly. There's quite a lot of, I mean, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, LURA was a Christmas tree bill. There is a lot hanging around, a lot in that act, some of which could be fairly useful, transformative tools, some of which could not be. And so I think there might be some sorting through as to parts which they would find useful to bring forward and parts which actually might not be. I mean, the 30-month local plan reforms, if they could actually make those work, that would be quite something. When it comes to bringing forward local coverage, but now we're straying into other people's talks. So,
well, I think overall, though, isn't it, that this, if if they really want to deliver significant change, now is the time to embed it. The strongest mandate that they'll ever have before you get into the by-elections in the shires. Because remember that obviously Labour now have control of quite a lot of shires, and you can see that coming down the track, that can potentially cause them problems.
Yeah,
Now is the
sure.
time to be bold and really deliver something straight from the gate in terms of policy reform, and whether that kind of goes back to the old 2012 version of the framework, which was, very, in my view, a very good start to work from and go from there type thing, because the challenges are quite significant for us. But now is the time to be bold.
And to do it with
Well,
as
most
little
definitely.
statutory legislation as possible,
Yes,
because
yes.
the fewer big counter bills that you've got to get through Parliament, the less opportunity there are to get derailed by a backbench rebellion. The more that you can do through tools that are already enacted or statutory instruments which you already have the power to do.
Well, if you look at Laura, then it gives you a lot of scope to do stuff,
It
because
does.
it says that the Secretary of State will bring forward regulation on you have called the Henry VIII.
Oh yeah, the Henry VIII bill. I was very proud of that.
So it was a very good moment. But also, it's the old adage, isn't it? Do the 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 difficult stuff now, because no one's going to be able to remember that in 4 years' time, when actually they're just recouping the benefits of the difficult, knotty stuff at the beginning. What they're going to see is actually how that's been delivered. But you don't want to be doing this when it, in 3 years' time. You want to be doing these kind of reforms right now, because you want to actually deliver that during the course of this Parliament. So, and I think there is sort of a lot of logic in getting the really difficult planning agenda through right now, so you don't have massive backbench rebellion. As you say, the mandate is really, really strong there for them. So, if you listen to all the commentators, it is go bold, go big, go hard early on, because then you want to stand on that, the results that come from going bold quite early on, don't you? And sort of trying to convince people, as you say, when the shires, and we've had the by-election, or not by-elections, but we've had the council elections, and everyone starts getting a bit grumpy about it. You don't want to start bringing forward planning reform and change.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this was all in their manifesto. I mean, they played a blinder. They set out the direction of reform in the manifesto, and now they are basically following it through. It's the wonderful thing about the last couple of weeks is there have been very few surprises other than possible pace. The pace did take me a little bit by surprise. I did not expect to have the Chancellor say that she was going to do something and then for it to happen within 20 minutes. That did surprise me. But other than that, the policy direction of travel, what they've said they're going to do, has been roadmapped since the manifesto. And actually, as Claire was saying, with the shadow ministers and everyone having been in place for a while, since before the manifesto.
Mhm.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's exciting times, isn't it? Sometimes there is a bit of a waver once you get in Whitehall, and whether the internal machine starts going, oh well, actually, some of this stuff is really hard and really difficult, and kind of starts slowing down. They've got to commit. They've got to maintain the momentum and really drive through the change that they want. Because you're right. The manifesto is hanging its hat. Its whole agenda is actually hanging its hat on planning reform. Ultimately, planning reform and infrastructure, energy infrastructure. They're the two key things. So they have to move forward quickly. Otherwise, they're going to be in a bit of trouble in a couple of years' time.
Agreed. I concur.
Hello, viewers. Sam again. My thanks to Nicola, Claire, and David for letting me share that conversation with you. And indeed, my thanks to everybody that contributed to this series. Please do keep in mind, viewers, that 50 Shades of Planning is by planners and for planners, And so if you would like to use this channel for sharing anything you think that we need to be talking about, then do please feel free to get in touch with me via samstafford@hotmail.com. Please also feel free to share this video on your social platforms. Anybody that does will be entitled to an exclusive 50 Shades mug. My thanks to podcast partners Kratos for helping me get these videos online. What have we learnt? Well, town and country planning is very much not a black and white endeavour. There are at least 50 shades in between. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of 50 Shades of Planning, which is brought to you in partnership with Kratos. Kratos are a leading communications consultancy providing integrated strategic communications and campaigns across multiple sectors. We have helped some of the UK's best-known brands deliver local and national campaigns, manage political and reputational risks, and influence national policy on some of the most important issues facing the UK. We are more than an agency, we are change makers. Find out more at kratos.co.uk.